The cart stopped at the outer gate just past midday. Rowan Stone climbed down without waiting for the driver to offer a hand. She had learned years ago that waiting made people uncomfortable. Better to move with purpose, to carry your own weight, to arrive on your own terms. She wore a wool traveling coat gone thin at the elbows, practical boots that had walked through 3 territories before this one, and a leather satchel across one shoulder. Strapped to her back was the case. The manuscripts inside had been wrapped in oilcloth twice over, protected against rain and rough roads, and the kind of handling that came from people who didn't understand what they were worth. The case was worth more than everything else she owned. The gate before her was iron and oak, twice her height, the kind of construction that had been standing long enough to outlast the people who built it. 2 guards flanked either side. They wore leather worked soft from use, and they looked at her the way people always looked when she arrived somewhere alone, trying to decide what category she belonged to. She saved them the trouble. Rowan Stone, contracted by your scriptorum. I'm here for the manuscript. The taller guard unfolded a paper from his belt, read it once then again. His eyes moved from the page to her face, back to the page. You're the translator. That's what I said. He stepped aside. The gate opened with the sound of metal on metal, old hinges that had been opening and closing for longer than she had been alive. The courtyard was larger than she had expected, stone on all sides. The fortress had been built in layers each century, adding weight to the one before it. The walls were dark with old rain. The towers rose at uneven intervals, older than the walls themselves. And then she saw them. Men and women in rough wool and leather going about the morning's work, carrying wood, moving grain sacks, sharpening tools against whetstone, the rhythmic scrape carrying across the open space. Ordinary except for the way they moved, the way they held still when they wanted to, the way their eyes tracked without their heads turning. She was halfway across the courtyard when the first one stopped. A man with a grain sack over his shoulder. He set it down slowly, the movement careful, deliberate. Then he turned toward her and lowered his head. Not a bow exactly, more like a weight pulling him down from the inside. Something involuntary, something that moved through him faster than thought. She almost stopped walking. Didn't. But then the woman by the stable door did the same thing, and the 2 guards near the well, and the boy carrying firewood who couldn't have been more than 15. One by one, in a ripple moving outward from where she walked, every wolf in the courtyard went still and lowered their head. She counted without meaning to. A habit from childhood, the way her mind made order out of uncertainty. She counted the ones she could see clearly, stopped at 40, kept walking. She did not look up at the windows, but someone was watching. Theron Ashford saw it from the 2nd floor. He was mid-sentence. Something about the eastern border, something the council had been arguing about for 3 weeks without resolution. The same conversation, different words, the kind of circular debate that happened when no one wanted to make the actual decision. And then Kieran said his name, twice, and he still didn't answer because he was watching the courtyard. The translator had arrived. A woman dark-haired, walking like she knew exactly where she was going, even though she had never been here. Even though she had no reason to know that the path through the courtyard led to the east entrance, that the scriptorum was in the tower she couldn't yet see from where she stood. And his wolves were bowing, not performing, not choosing to show respect to a stranger out of courtesy. Bowing the way they bowed to him, the deep involuntary pull of recognition that moved through a pack when something fundamental shifted. When the structure of things changed at a level that bodies understood before minds could name it. He had seen it once before in his life, 14 years ago when he had first walked into this courtyard as king. He turned from the window. Continue, he said. His beta continued. Theron heard none of it. His hands flat on the stone ledge had not moved. The scriptorum was in the east tower, 3rd floor. The steward who led her there was a thin man named Finn, who walked too fast and talked too much. He explained that the manuscript had been found 6 weeks ago during repairs to the foundation, that 3 people had tried to read it, that the oldest scholar in the territory had identified the script as archaic Norse and said they needed someone from outside. How old is it? Rowan asked. The parchment suggests 300 years, perhaps more. She nodded. That tracked with what they had described in the contract. The scriptorum itself had high ceilings and good light from the narrow windows. Shelves on every wall stacked with manuscripts in varying states of decay. A long work table in the center. A fireplace on the north wall producing heat in the approximate quantity of a single candle. She made a note of that. The cold would slow her work. The manuscript was on the table, already unrolled and weighted at the corners with smooth river stones. She pulled on her thin leather gloves and leaned over the table. The script was dense and precise. Whoever had written this had done it carefully with the kind of attention that meant they believed it mattered. The ink had browned but held. The parchment had been treated well before it was sealed away. She could read it. She read the first 3 lines and went very still. Here is set down the covenant of the Silvercrest bloodline, that the bond of the true mate shall not be broken by law or lord or the passage of years. The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn around. She was reading. You're the translator. The voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't need volume because rooms paid attention to it instead. You're the second person to say that to me today, she said. I'm starting to think it's the only thing anyone here knows about me. A pause. What's your name? Rowan Stone. Just Rowan Stone. She turned around then. The man in the doorway was broader through the shoulders than the frame suggested at first glance. The kind of build that came from actual use rather than display. Gray at the temples, visible even in the uneven light. Scars on his face, old ones, the kind that had stopped being talked about years ago. He was looking at the table, at her work, maybe at her. I'm told the work will take 2 weeks, he said. Depends on the manuscript. And this one is going to take 3. His breath caught, just once, audible. Then the door closed. She turned around. The room was empty. She looked at the door for a moment. Then she looked back at the manuscript. The first 3 lines read like a map to something she hadn't known she was walking toward. She picked up her pen and started working. The days that followed had a rhythm to them, from morning light through the narrow windows slanting across the work table in a way that moved with the hours. She worked in that light when it was good, tracking the script, line by line, word by word, checking her translation against the lexicons she had brought and the reference manuscripts stacked on the shelves around her. The script was archaic but consistent. Whoever had written this knew what they were doing. It was structured in 3 parts: a covenant, a lineage record, and a third section that used terminology she hadn't encountered before. Words that existed in archaic Norse, but had been used here in ways that didn't match any documents she had translated. She made notes in the margins of her working copy, questions to return to, patterns that repeated. Finn brought food twice a day and asked no questions, which she appreciated. The first meal came mid-morning, bread and cheese and something hot to drink that wasn't tea, but served the same purpose. The second came in the evening, more substantial, meant to last through the night if she was still working. She usually was. The courtyard was visible from one of the windows if she stood at the right angle. She found herself looking out more than she meant to, watching the wolves move through their routines, the way they carried things, the way they spoke to each other in low voices that didn't carry, and the way they stopped when she crossed the space between the tower and the great hall. She had to cross it twice a day for meals. Once in the evening, once at midday, when the light in the scriptorium shifted and she needed to move anyway, needed to stand and walk and let her eyes rest from the close work. Every time the same thing happened. The ones who had been in the courtyard on the first day did it immediately, heads dropping before she reached them, the movement smooth and automatic. The ones who hadn't been there took a moment longer, like something in them was catching up to something they didn't have a word for. She had stopped counting. She had not stopped thinking about what it meant. On the 3rd day, Theron came to the scriptorium again. She was working when the door opened. She looked up. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Not entering, not leaving. You eat at the table, he said. The light is better here. There's a hall. I know. Is there a rule about eating in the scriptorium? His jaw tightened. Just a fraction. No. Then I'll keep eating at the table. He came into the room. That surprised her. She had expected him to leave the way he had left the first time, abrupt and without explanation. Instead, he walked to the shelves on the east wall and looked at the manuscripts there. Not touching, just looking. She watched him. The gray at his temples was more visible in the daylight. The scars on his face were old, deep enough to have changed the shape of the skin around them. Whatever had made them a long time ago. The 3rd section, she said, the terminology is unusual. Some of these words, I've seen them in other pact documents, but not used this way. He turned from the shelf. What do they say? I'm still working on it. She paused. What do you know about the manuscript? Less than you, apparently. That's not an answer. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at council members who pushed too far. She held the look. It was found in the foundation, he said finally. The foundation is 400 years old. The fort was built on top of something older. What was here before the fort? No one knows. She turned back to the manuscript, tapped the parchment lightly with one gloved finger. That's not true. Someone knew. They wrote it down. She looked up at him. That's why I'm here. The air between them felt different, charged in a way she didn't have language for. You didn't bow, he said. She looked up. Sorry. When you crossed the courtyard. My wolves bowed. You didn't. I'm not a wolf. No. He studied her. But you noticed. I count things when I'm nervous. You didn't look nervous. I know, that's the point. His eyes went a degree quieter. She filed it away without knowing why. He left without saying anything else. She looked at the door after he had gone. Then she looked at the manuscript. The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls. She had translated that line on the first day. She had not written it in her notes yet. She wasn't sure why. On the fourth day, she walked through the great hall at midday and noticed the silence. Not complete silence. People were eating, talking in low voices at the far end of the hall. But the space around her was empty, a radius of several feet in every direction, like an invisible boundary no one was willing to cross. She finished her meal and walked back to the script room. The pull started when she reached the midpoint of the courtyard. She stopped walking. Not because she wanted to, because something hooked behind her ribs and tugged backward. Not pain, exactly, more like wrongness, like she had left something behind, and her body knew it even if her mind didn't. She turned around, looked back at the great hall. The pull eased. She walked back toward the script room, and it faded entirely. She stood there in the cold, trying to understand what her body was telling her that her mind refused to accept. Then she went back to work. That night, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside the scriptorium. She was still at the table. The third section was pulling at her, something in the phrasing that felt like it was one turn away from making sense. The fire had burned down to coals. The rest of the fortress was quiet. The footsteps stopped outside her door. She waited. The door didn't open. She could hear breathing on the other side. Slow, even like someone who had stopped and hadn't decided yet what to do about it. She looked at the door, said nothing. After a long moment, the footsteps moved on. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then she picked up her pen and kept working. On the sixth day, she walked through the courtyard at midday and counted without meaning to. 73 wolves visible. Every single one went still when she passed. Every head lowered. The pull was stronger now. Every time she moved away from certain parts of the fortress, every time she tried to walk to the far end where the outer wall met the old watchtower. She had tried twice more. Both times the wrongness became unbearable before she made it halfway. Something was tethering her, and she was starting to understand what. The summons came on the seventh day. Finn delivered it in the morning, visibly uncomfortable. She asked him what it was about. He said he didn't know. She looked at him until he admitted he did know, but wasn't authorized to say. She told him she would come after the midday meal. Not before. She was in the middle of a passage, and interrupting it would cost her 2 hours of reconstruction. Finn looked uncertain. The council doesn't wait, he said. Then the council can learn, she said. She came after the midday meal. The council chamber was on the ground floor of the main hall, a long room with a low ceiling and a table that seated 12. 7 men were seated when she entered. Theron was at the head of the table. He looked at her when she came in. Then he looked at the chair they had placed across from the council, separated from the table by 6 feet of empty floor. A muscle worked in his jaw. She sat down, placed her hands flat on the wood in front of her. Waited. The man to Theron's left spoke first. Gray-haired, careful enunciation, the kind of voice that had spent years in rooms like this one. You're aware that you're human. I've suspected it for some time, yes. Someone at the far end of the table made a sound, not quite a laugh. The gray-haired man did not react. You're aware that this territory operates under pack law. I read the contract before I signed it. Pack law has provisions regarding humans within the walls, specifically regarding humans who, he paused, who have an unusual effect on the pack. She kept her face neutral. Define unusual. 117 wolves in this territory registered a bond response on the day of your arrival. He placed both palms on the table. That does not happen. It has not happened in this territory in 14 years. The last time it happened, it was because a new king had arrived. The room was very quiet. She looked at Theron. He was looking at the table. I'm a translator, she said. I came for a manuscript. Yes, and the manuscript. What has it told you so far? She let 3 seconds pass. I'm not finished. But you've begun. The gray-haired man leaned forward slightly. Everyone begins before they finish. That's how reading works. His eyes didn't change. Pack law is clear on this matter. A human who activates a bond response within pack walls is subject to review by the council. We determine whether she stays or is returned to her point of origin. She let that sit for a moment. You're telling me you can send me home. We're telling you it's a possibility we're required to consider. She looked at each man at the table in turn, counted the ones who had already decided. 4. The other 3 were still watching, still weighing. Then she looked at Theron. He had not said a single word since she had entered the room. He sat at the head of that table like he had been carved into it, still, heavy, present in the way that large things were present. But his jaw was tight, and his hands flat on the table had not moved once. She knew what a man looked like when he was holding himself very carefully in place. "What does the king say?" she asked. Every head turned toward Theron. He looked up. His eyes met hers across the length of the table. "The translator stays," he said, "until the work is done." The gray-haired man opened his mouth. Theron looked at him. He closed it. That was the end of the meeting. She caught up to Theron in the corridor outside. "Wait," he stopped, turned. "You didn't tell them," she said, "about the manuscript, what it says." "No, why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was narrow and the torchlight was uneven, and he was close enough that she could see the exact line where one of the old scars crossed his jaw. "Because I don't know yet what it means," he said. "I think you do." His breath changed, shallower. "Finish the translation," he said, "then we'll talk." He walked away. She stood in the corridor and watched him go. Her heart was doing something inconvenient. She noted it, filed it, and went back to the scriptorium. The third section wasn't going to translate itself. She finished the third section on the 10th night. It took until past midnight. The fire had gone out twice, and she had rebuilt it twice, and at some point Finn had stopped coming with food. So she had eaten the bread she kept in her satchel and kept working. Her back hurt. Her eyes hurt. She didn't stop. The third section was not a lineage record. It was not a covenant addendum. It was something she didn't have a clean word for in any of the 5 languages she spoke. A description, precise and clinical, of what happened when a Lycan king of the Silvercrest bloodline found his true mate. She read it once fast to get the shape of it. Then she read it again, slowly, word by word, making sure she hadn't mistranslated. She hadn't. According to the manuscript, the bond was not chosen. It was not negotiated. It activated on proximity. The mate entering the king's territory for the first time triggered a response in every wolf bonded to the king. Because the king's bond was the pack's bond. What one felt, all felt. The bowing was not deference. It was recognition. The pack's body understanding something before the mind caught up. The mate would not feel it the same way. She would feel something. A pull. A wrongness when she moved away from the territory. A rightness when she stayed. But she would not feel the full weight of it until the king named her. Until he spoke it out loud in front of witnesses under pack law. Until then, she was just a woman in a fortress full of wolves who kept lowering their heads when she walked past. Rowan sat back in her chair. She thought about the footsteps in the corridor, the ones that stopped outside her door and didn't come in. She thought about the way he had said the translator stays in that council chamber. Flat and final. No explanation offered. None needed. She thought about his hands on the table. Flat. Still. Holding. She picked up the manuscript and went to find him. It was past midnight. The fortress was quiet. She didn't know where his chambers were. So she went to the only other place she had seen him, the second-floor corridor overlooking the courtyard where Finn had mentioned the king kept his working rooms. She found him there, not in a room, in the corridor itself, standing at the window looking out at the dark courtyard below. He was still dressed. He hadn't slept. She stopped a few feet away, set the manuscript down on the stone ledge between them. "I finished," she said. He looked at the manuscript, then at her. "The third section," she said. "I know what it is. I know what the bowing means. I know what you've known since I walked through your gate." He said nothing. "I want to hear you say it," she said. "I want the manuscript. You." The corridor was cold. The torches had burned low and the light was uneven, and she could hear the wind outside working at the stone. He was looking at her with those gray eyes that went quieter instead of louder when something moved behind them. "You're my mate," he said. 3 words, no ornament. The way he said everything like it had been weighed before it was spoken. She held them for a moment. "How long have you known?" "Since the courtyard, when I saw them bow." "That was the first dare, though." "Yes." She looked out the window at the dark courtyard below, the same courtyard she had crossed 10 days ago, not knowing what she was walking into. The manuscript says, "You have to name me," she said, "in front of witnesses, under law. That's what makes it binding." "Yes. And if you don't," he was quiet for a moment, "then you finish the work, you leave, the bond stays. It doesn't dissolve, but it goes unnamed." "And an unnamed bond," he stopped. "What happens to an unnamed bond?" "It hollows you out," he said slowly. "Both of you." She turned to look at him. He was still looking out the window. "You've been standing in this corridor every night," she said, "outside my door." He didn't deny it. "Yes." "And why didn't you tell me?" "Because telling you meant asking you to choose something you didn't come here to choose." She looked at him for a longer time, the line of his jaw, the scars, the gray at his temples that caught the torchlight. "There was someone before," she said. It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. "Yes." She left. She chose another territory. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, final. But underneath it was something that had been carried a long time. She could hear the weight of it. "And you stopped naming things after that," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he hadn't let himself do since the first day. "Yes," he said quietly. She picked up the manuscript from the ledge, held it for a moment. "I'm going to sleep," she said, "and tomorrow I want to talk. Not about the bond, about you, about what you're actually afraid of." She met his eyes. "Can you do that?" The tension in his shoulders eased, just slightly. "Yeah," he said. She left him in the corridor. He stood there for a long time after she was gone. She didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the room they had given her and stared at the ceiling and thought about words written 300 years ago that described her life with more accuracy than she could have managed herself. "The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls." The pull she had felt when walking away from the scriptorium, the wrongness, the sense of something left behind. It wasn't the cold, it wasn't fatigue, it was the bond, unnamed, unacknowledged, but active, hollowing her out one day at a time. She got up before dawn, dressed in the near dark, went to the scriptorium, and worked until the light was good enough to stop using the candles. She was still there when Finn came with the breakfast. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He set the tray down, bread, cheese, something hot in a clay cup that steamed in the cold air. "The king asked me to tell you something," Finn said. She looked up. "He'll be in the south courtyard this morning, working on the wall, if you want to talk." Finn left. She finished her breakfast, drank the hot liquid. It wasn't tea, but it served the same purpose. Then she went to find him. The south courtyard was smaller than the main one, less traffic. A section of the outer wall had crumbled during the winter storms, and Theron was there with two of his men moving stone. Not supervising, actually moving stone. His hands were dirty, his sleeves were rolled back. He was doing the work the way someone did when they needed the work more than the work needed doing. He looked up when she approached, said something to the men that sent them to the other end of the courtyard. She stopped a few feet from him. "You said yes last night," she said, "to talking." "I remember." "So talk." He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down on the low section of wall he'd been repairing, rested his forearms on his knees. She sat beside him. Not close, just near. The courtyard was quiet. The morning light was flat and cold, the kind that made everything look like it had been there forever. "Her name was Celine," he said. She waited. "We were bonded for 3 years. She was Pack, born here, grew up here. I named her in front of the full council the year I took the throne." He paused. "I thought naming something made it real, made it permanent." "What happened?" "The Nightshade territory sent an ambassador. He was here for 2 months negotiating a border agreement." He looked at his hands. "She left with him when he went home." Rowan said nothing. Let him keep the pace. "Pack law allows it," he said. "A mate can dissolve a bond if both parties agree to release it." I agreed, because she asked me to, because refusing would have meant holding someone who didn't want to be held. He exhaled slowly. "The council said I handled it with dignity. I think I just didn't know what else to do." "And after that you stopped." "After that I ran the territory alone and decided that was enough." "Was it?" He looked at her. "No." She looked out at the courtyard. A pair of wolves were crossing the far end, heads down against the wind. One of them glanced toward her and dipped their chin before looking away again. She was starting to get used to it. "I'm not her," Rowan said. "I know. I don't mean it as reassurance. I mean, I need you to see me, not what you lost, not what you're afraid of losing again. Me. She turned to look at him. I came here with a leather case full of manuscripts and no plan beyond the work. I'm not here because of the bond. I didn't know about the bond. I know that too. Then what are you afraid of? He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the courtyard and the torches on the far wall bent sideways and straightened again. That it won't be enough, he said, naming you. That I'll do it and you'll stay for a season and then understand what it means to be bound to a king and a territory and a pack and decide the cost is too high. That's not a reason not to try. No, he said, it's just a fear. She looked at him, the set of his shoulders, the way he held still under pressure, not because nothing was moving inside him, but because he'd learned that moving made it worse. You said last night that an unnamed bond hollows you out, she said. Both of us. Yes. I've been feeling it since the third day. She said it plainly. No drama in it. I thought it was the cold or the work, but it wasn't that. It was every time I left the scriptorium and walked to the far end of the fortress. Something pulled, like I'd left something behind. She paused. I didn't know what it was until last night. He was very still. I'm not afraid of staying, she said. I'm not afraid of the bond. I've read enough pack law to know what it means, and I'm not afraid of it. She held his gaze. I'm afraid you'll spend the rest of your life waiting for me to leave and miss the part where I don't. He looked at her for a long time. The wind came through the courtyard again. She didn't move. Neither did he. The council meets Friday, he said. I know. I want to name you then, in front of all of them. He said it the way he said things that mattered, carefully, like each word had been picked up and examined before being set down. Not because pack law requires it, because I want there to be witnesses. I want it said out loud in a room full of people so there's no way to pretend it didn't happen. She felt something settle in her chest, quiet and solid. Friday, she said. Friday. She stood up, brushed the stone dust from her skirt. He stood too, and for a moment they were close enough that she could see the exact gray of his eyes in the flat morning light. She didn't move back. Neither did he. Finish the wall, she said. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. She left him in the courtyard. She was back in the scriptorium before she let herself breathe properly. 7 days until Friday. The woman arrived on the 12th day. Rowan was working when Finn came to the door more flustered than usual. There's a visitor, he said, from the Nightshade territory. She asked to see the king, but she also asked about you. Rowan set down her pen. About me. She said she heard there was a translator, a human woman. Finn shifted his weight. She said her name is Celine. They met in one of the smaller sitting rooms off the main hall. Celine was younger than Rowan had expected. Early 30s, perhaps. Dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore traveling clothes well made but not ornamental, and when she stood to greet Rowan, the curve of her belly was visible. 4 months, maybe. Not much more than that. Rowan Stone, Celine said. I've heard your name more in the last 2 days than I've heard my own. Her voice was warm, no edge to it. Rowan sat down across from her. You came a long way, Rowan said. I came to deliver treaty documents. Routine diplomatic work. But I'd be lying if I said that was the only reason. Celine placed her hands over her belly. The gesture was unconscious, protective. I heard about the bowing, she said. The whole pack responding. I heard Theron hasn't named anyone in 6 years. She met Rowan's eyes. I heard he's going to name you. Rowan said nothing. I didn't come to stop it, Celine said. I came to tell you something. Because I think you should hear it before Friday. She leaned forward slightly. I didn't leave because Theron wasn't enough. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because being queen meant things I wasn't built for. Her voice was steady, no bitterness in it. Constant politics, always watched, always weighing every word, every choice, every relationship against what it meant for the territory. I couldn't just be myself, I had to be the queen, and I wasn't strong enough for that. She paused. I chose a smaller life, with a man who wanted quiet too. It doesn't make Theron's life wrong. It makes us different. Rowan watched her, trying to find the lie, the manipulation. There wasn't one. Why are you telling me this? Rowan asked. Because Theron is a good man, a good king, but he's been carrying my leaving like a failure, like he wasn't enough to make me stay. Celine's expression softened. Don't let my leaving make him afraid of your staying. Don't let what I couldn't do become the measure of what you can. She reached into the bag beside her chair, and pulled out a length of cloth, deep blue woven with silver thread and patterns that caught the light. This is a blessing cloth, traditional in nightshade territory. We give it to couples before bonding ceremonies. She set it on the table between them. For your ceremony, peace between our territories, and peace for you both. Rowan looked at the cloth, the intricate work, the time it represented. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know. Celine stood. You'll be wonderful, she said. You already are. She left. Rowan sat alone in the room for a long time looking at the cloth. Then she picked it up and went back to the scriptorium. The council pressure came on the 13th day. Finn brought the message in the morning. Vesper wanted to speak with her, privately, in his study. She went. The study was on the second floor east wing, smaller than the council chamber. Books on every wall, a desk that had seen decades of use. Vesper was standing by the window when she entered. Sit, he said. She sat. He turned to face her, studied her with the kind of look that had been measuring people for a very long time. You're an intelligent woman, he said. So I'm going to speak plainly. I appreciate that. The king intends to name you on Friday, under pack law that makes you queen. Of this territory. Of this pack. He moved to the desk, didn't sit, just stood behind it. There are members of this council who believe that's a mistake. Not because of you personally, because of what you are. Human. Yes. He spread his fingers on the desk surface. A queen strengthens the bloodline, strengthens alliances, brings connections to other territories, other packs. A human queen brings none of that. Rowan held his gaze. What does a human queen bring, she asked. Weakness. He said it without malice, just fact. The Eastern Territories have been watching Silvercrest closely, waiting for an opportunity. A human queen would be seen as exactly that. And if I refuse the naming, then Theron remains unmated, the bond goes unnamed, and eventually you leave. The territory continues as it has. With Theron alone. Yes, she stood. Is that what you want? For him to spend the rest of his life alone because 6 years ago, someone left and you're all still afraid it will happen again? Vesper's expression didn't change. I want what's best for this territory, he said. So do I, Rowan said. That's why I'm staying. She left. That afternoon, she walked beyond the fortress walls for the first time since she had arrived. She needed space, air, distance from the weight of stone and expectation and eyes that watched every move. The village was a quarter-mile from the main gate, small houses clustered close, smoke from chimneys, the sound of work happening behind closed doors. She walked slowly, looking at the way people lived when they weren't performing for anyone. An elderly woman was sitting outside one of the houses working at a loom set up in the weak sunlight. Her hands moved with a kind of certainty that came from doing something for so long, it was no longer conscious. She looked up when Rowan approached. You're the translator, she said. Yes. I'm Mira, I weave. Rowan looked at the cloth taking shape on the loom. Silvercrest colors, deep gray and silver. It's beautiful, Rowan said. It's functional, Mira said. But thank you. She gestured to the stool beside her. Sit, if you want. Rowan sat. They were quiet for a moment. The shuttle moved back and forth. The cloth grew. You're the first human woman to walk through this village in 14 years, Mira said. Last one was a queen too. Before my time, but I heard the stories. What happened to her? She changed things, not because she tried to be a wolf, because she asked different questions. Mira's hands didn't stop moving. Wolves think in terms of strength, territory, pack hierarchy. She thought in terms of resources, trade, how to make what we had go further. Did it work? We had 3 human queens in Silvercrest history, Mira said. Each one brought something wolves couldn't see because we were too close to it. One was a healer, brought medicine. One was an architect, redesigned the fortress defenses after a siege nearly broke us. One was a diplomat, ended a 50-year war with the Southern Territories. She looked at Rowan. We don't need another wolf queen. We need someone who sees what we're too close to see. Rowan watched the shuttle move. The council doesn't see it that way. The council is afraid. Fear makes people hold tight to what they know. Mira pulled the shuttle through. The pattern took shape. But fear is just fear. It doesn't get to decide what happens next. She met Rowan's eyes. You do. That night, Rowan went back to the manuscript. She had finished the third section, but there was something at the end, a notation. Smaller script added later. She had assumed it was a scribe's mark, a signature, a date. She read it again. It wasn't a signature, it was an addendum. Here is set down the record of queens who ruled Silvercrest not by blood, but by bond. Elaine the healer who brought the knowledge of salves and poultices. Margaret the builder who raised the eastern tower and fortified the walls. Isabel the speaker who ended the southern war with words when swords had failed. Rowan sat back. Let it be known that strength comes not from sameness, but from seeing what others cannot. The bloodline is protected not by purity, but by wisdom. She read it 3 times. Then she made a copy in her working notes. The manuscript wasn't just describing the bond, it was giving permission. The next morning she found Theron in the main courtyard. He was talking to Kieran the beta. Something about patrol routes, logistics, the kind of work that never stopped. She waited until they finished. Kieran nodded to her as he left. His expression held something that might have been approval. Theron turned to face her. I talked to Vesper yesterday, she said. I know. He thinks I'm a mistake. Vesper thinks anything he didn't suggest first is a mistake. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. I went to the village, she said, talked to a weaver. She told me about the human queens, the ones in the manuscript. And I think I understand now what I'm supposed to bring. It's not strength like a wolf has strength, it's perspective, questions, ways of seeing that don't come from inside the pack. She looked at him. But I need to know something, not about the bond, about you. He waited. What if I fail, she said. What if I can't be what they need? What if the council is right and I'm just, stop. He moved closer, not touching, just close. You think I chose you because you're perfect, because you have all the answers. I don't know why you chose me, Sam. I didn't choose you, he said. The bond chose you, but I'm choosing to name you, and that's different. He looked at her with those gray eyes that had spent 6 years learning how to stay quiet. I'm choosing you because when you walked into that council chamber and they tried to intimidate you, you counted the ones who'd already decided. Because when you translate, you don't just read words, you understand what they mean. Because you're afraid of failing and you're doing it anyway. He paused. That's who I'm choosing. Not some idea of a perfect queen. You. She felt something in her chest crack open. Just a little. Just enough. Friday, she said. Friday. This time when she left, she didn't look back. 4 days until Friday, and she knew exactly what she was walking toward. Thursday evening came with a sky the color of old pewter. Rowan was in the scriptorium when Theron arrived. He didn't knock, just opened the door and stood there holding an armful of firewood. She looked up from the manuscript. The fire's out, he said. She looked at the fireplace. He was right. She had let it burn down to nothing and hadn't noticed. He came in and began rebuilding it, arranging the wood with the kind of precision that came from doing something so many times it became automatic. The kindling caught. Small flames grew into larger ones. Heat began to fill the room. She watched him work. When the fire was stable, he stood, brushed the ash from his hands, but he didn't leave. I need to ask you something, he said. She waited. What if I fail you? The words came out careful, like they'd been held for a long time and only now found the space to be spoken. What if I can't protect you from the weight of this, the scrutiny, the politics, the council always questioning? What if I name you tomorrow and it becomes a burden you can't carry? She set down her pen, stood, crossed the room until she was standing close enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes. I'm not asking you to carry me, she said. I'm asking you to walk beside me. She held his gaze. I need to ask you something too. Not the bond, not the law. You. She took a breath. Do you want this? The fire crackled. Outside, the wind worked at the stone walls the way it had worked at them for 400 years. Yes, he said finally. Low. Certain. The way he said things he had examined from every angle and decided were true. Every minute since you walked through that gate, she felt something settle in her chest, something that had been suspended waiting. Then that's enough, she said. He reached out, took her hand. His fingers were warm from handling the firewood. They stood there in the scriptorium with the fire burning and the manuscript on the table behind them and the whole fortress settling into night. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. He left. She stood by the fire for a long time after he was gone. Friday morning came with frost on the stone. Rowan woke before dawn, dressed in the half-light. The room was cold and her breath made clouds in the air, and she could hear the fortress beginning to wake around her. She went to the window. The courtyard below was already busy, wolves moving with purpose, carrying things, preparing, not for war, for ceremony. She watched them for a while. Then she went to the scriptorium. The manuscript was still on the table where she had left it. 2 copies finished waited at the corners. The work was done. Whatever happened today, the work was done. She ran her hand over the parchment. The careful script, 300 years old and still speaking truth. The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls. She knew now. She had stood inside these walls for 18 days. And she knew. Finn came for her mid-morning. "The council wants to see you," he said, before the ceremony. She had expected this. Where the small chamber, off the east hall. She followed him through corridors she had walked 100 times, past windows that looked out on courtyards where wolves still bowed when she passed, downstairs worn smooth by centuries of feet. The chamber was small, a table, 6 chairs, 3 men waiting, Vesper, and 2 others she recognized from the first council meeting. No Theron. She sat down. Vesper placed both hands flat on the table. "We're here to offer you something," he said, "before the ceremony, while there's still time to choose." "Choose what?" "To leave." He said it plainly. No malice, just fact. "We'll give you gold, enough to live comfortably for years. Safe passage to any territory you name. A letter of reference that will ensure work wherever you go." He leaned forward slightly. "No shame, no dishonor. You came for a manuscript. You translated it. The work is done. You can leave with respect and with means." She looked at each man in turn. "And Theron, the king will understand, in time." "Will he be?" Vesper's eyes didn't change. "He'll have to." She sat back in her chair, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at them. "You're giving me a choice you never gave him," she said. "You're asking if I'm sure, if I understand what I'm walking into, if I'm strong enough." She stood. "I've spent 18 days translating a manuscript about my own fate. Every word reminded me I could walk away. Every line was a door I could have taken." She leaned forward, palms on the table. "I stayed because I choose this. Not destiny, not duty. Him." Her voice was steady. "I choose the weight. I choose the scrutiny. I choose the council members who think I'm a mistake. I choose all of it." She met Vesper's eyes. "Because I also choose the possibility that I might actually be good at this. That being different might be exactly what this territory needs. That asking different questions might lead to better answers." She straightened. "So no, I'm not taking your gold. I'm not taking your safe passage. I'm walking into that ceremony and I'm letting him name me, and we're going to find out together what comes next." She walked to the door, stopped, looked back. "And if you want to keep questioning whether I'm strong enough, you can do that. But you'll be doing it while I'm queen." She left. The corridor outside was empty. She leaned against the wall for a moment, let her hands stop shaking. Then she went to find what she was walking toward. The great hall had been transformed. Tapestries on the walls. Candles in iron holders, hundreds of them, making the space bright despite the gray day outside. The long tables had been moved to the sides and people stood in their place. 30 wolves, perhaps more. The senior members of the pack. The ones who had been here long enough to remember other ceremonies. Other namings. They turned when she entered. Every head dipped. Brief. Acknowledging. She walked down the center of the hall, the path they had left clear. At the far end, the council sat at a table. Vesper in the center, the others flanking him. And standing in front of the table facing her was Theron. He wore the same clothes she had seen him in every day. Leather, wool, nothing ceremonial. But the clasp at his shoulder was silver, and he stood like the room had been built around him. He looked at her as she walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away. Vesper stood. "This council is convened under Pack Law Article 9 regarding the naming of a mate bond." His voice carried in the quiet. "The king has invoked his right to name. The human woman Rowan Stone stands as the named. She has been informed of the terms and implications under Pack Law." He sat down. The room was completely silent. Theron stepped forward, closed the distance between them until they were standing the way they had stood in the courtyard. In the corridor. Outside her door late at night when he couldn't make himself knock. Close, he reached out, took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. He turned to face the room. She turned with him. "I name Rowan Stone as my mate." His voice was clear, certain, the voice of someone who had made a choice and would not unmake it. Under pack law before this council, and pack the bond is spoken. He looked at her, then back at the room. It stands. The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. Not dramatic, not violent, just a settling. Like a note that had been hanging in the air, finally resolving into harmony. Rowan felt it move through her, through the room, through every person standing witness. The pull she had been feeling for 18 days, the wrongness when she walked away from certain parts of the fortress, the hollow ache behind her ribs, it settled. Not disappeared, transformed. From absence into presence. From question into answer. The candles in the hall, which had been flickering in the drafts, burned steadier. The flames straightened. The light grew warmer. Outside the windows, the snow that had been falling stopped. The sky, gray all morning, began to clear, pale winter blue showing through like something being revealed. The wolves in the room exhaled, not all at once, but close enough, a collective release of held breath. Vesper closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the tension in his face had eased. Two wolves near the back pressed their fists over their hearts, an old gesture, one Rowan had only seen in manuscripts. Someone made a sound that wasn't quite a word, more like relief given voice. Vesper stood. "The naming is witnessed," he said. His voice was different, quieter. "The bond is recorded." He looked at Rowan. "Welcome to Silvercrest, Rowan Ashford." The name landed in the room like a declaration. Rowan Ashford. She had been Rowan Stone for 25 years. Now she was something else. The wolves began to move, not leaving, coming forward. One by one they approached. Formal greetings, acknowledgments. The kind of ritual that meant something had changed and the pack was adjusting to accommodate it. An older woman pressed a small bundle into her hands, dried herbs tied with thread. "For luck," she said, "and for clarity when the council talks too long." A man, with gray in his beard, bowed slightly. "My queen," he said, testing the words, finding them acceptable. Kieran came forward grinning. "About time," he said. Then more formally, "It's good, this is good." And then Celine was there. She had been standing near the back watching. Now she approached with that same calm expression she had worn when they first met. She stopped in front of Rowan, looked at her for a long moment, then she stepped forward and embraced her. Brief, warm, real. "You'll be wonderful," she said quietly. "You already are." She stepped back, looked at Theron. "Take care of her," she said. "I will." "Good." Celine smiled. Then she moved away back into the crowd. The ceremony ended the way these things did, gradually, people moving toward the doors, conversations starting, the formal weight lifting into something more ordinary. But Rowan and Theron stayed, standing in the center of the hall, his hand still holding hers. The candles were burning lower. The light was softer. "You said you felt it on the first day," she said, when the gate opened. "Yes. I felt it on the third. Took me longer to catch up." His mouth curved, small, real. She laughed, short and genuine. The sound surprised her. It seemed to surprise him too. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the scriptorium that first day when she had told him the work would take 3 weeks and hadn't turned around. Like something in her kept landing differently than he expected. She thought she could live with being unexpected. She thought she could live with a lot of things in a fortress made of 4 centuries of stone, with frost on the windows, and a fire that needed rebuilding, and a king who had stood outside doors at midnight rather than knock. She would teach him to knock, eventually. His hand was still in hers. She didn't let go. He didn't either. 3 days later, Rowan returned to the scriptorium. Not to work. The manuscript was finished. Both copies had been delivered, one to the council archive, one to the king's private library. She came to see the room one last time, to close that chapter before the next one began. The room was exactly as she had left it. The work table, the shelves, the fireplace. The fire was built properly now. Theron had made sure of it. The door opened behind her. She knew who it was without turning around. Theron came in, walked to the table and sat across from where she stood. "I knocked," he said. "I heard." He looked at the empty table where the manuscript had been. Rowan reached into the satchel she had carried with her and pulled out a bundle of cloth, unfolded it carefully. A quilt, handmade, every stitch visible. The colors were silver crests, deep gray and silver, but worked into the pattern were other colors, threads she didn't recognize. "Mira came to see me yesterday," she said, "the weaver from the village." "I know Mira. She brought me this." She ran her hand over the stitching. She said it's tradition. When a new queen comes, the village women make something to welcome her, to show she belongs. She spread the quilt on the table between them. This one has threads from every household in the village. Different colors, different textures. She said it's to remind me that strength doesn't come from being the same. It comes from being woven together. Theron looked at the quilt, then at her. She's right. I know. She folded the cloth carefully, set it aside. I found something else in the manuscript, she said. An addendum, added later, different hand. What did it say, Arantun? It was about the human queens, the ones who came before, Elaine the healer, Margaret the builder, Isabel the speaker. She looked at him. It said strength comes not from sameness, but from seeing what others cannot. That the bloodline is protected not by purity, but by wisdom. He reached across the table, took her hand. Good, Baron, he said, because I need you to see what I can't. And what's that? I don't know yet. That's why I need you. She smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. They sat in the quiet for a moment, the fire crackling, the fortress settling around them. Then she stood. Come on, she said. Vesper wants to meet about the Eastern Territories. And after that, Finn says there's an actual meal, not just bread and cheese. You're hungry. I've been eating bread and cheese in a scriptorum for 3 weeks. Yes, I'm hungry. He laughed, a real one. The sound was brief but genuine. She had made him laugh. She filed that away as a victory. They left the scriptorum together, walked down the stairs side by side, through halls lit by torches that had been burning when her grandmother was born and would be burning long after she was gone. And as they walked, she thought about the words she had translated, the words that had described her life before she had lived it. The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls. She had come for a manuscript. She had found that she was already written into it. And now with Theron beside her and a pack that was learning to see her as she was, and a territory that needed the questions only she could ask, now she would write what came next. Not because fate demanded it, but because she chose it.